The Kepler 442 system had been peaceful for 300 years before the Void Swarm arrived. 2 million colonists lived on the 3 habitable worlds, mining rare crystals and operating massive agricultural facilities that fed half the outer rim territories. Now, the system was a war zone with council evacuation, ships racing against time to save as many lives as possible before the swarm's main force arrived. Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the USS Defiance, watching the evacuation progress through the main view screen. His small fleet had been working for 6 days straight, ferrying frightened civilians from the planet's surfaces to the massive council transport ships waiting at the system's edge. The human vessels were faster and more maneuverable than the alien ships, making them perfect for the dangerous runs between planet and space. Lieutenant Commander Amy Foster's voice crackled over the communication system from the USS Ranger. "Captain, we've got another 1,000 refugees loaded from the mining station. The Velthari transports are requesting immediate departure to the safe zone." Jake nodded to his communications officer. "Tell Commander Foster to maintain escort formation. We're not leaving anyone behind." He turned to his tactical officer, Lieutenant Steve Parker. "Any sign of swarm activity?" "Negative, sir. Long-range sensors are clear, but the council ships are reporting strange readings from the outer system. Could be sensor ghosts, or it could be something else." The evacuation had been going smoothly for almost a week. The council's intelligence reports indicated that the swarm was still 3 days away from reaching the system. The alien military forces had established a defensive perimeter at the system's edge, confident that their advanced warning systems would detect any swarm approach. Long before the evacuation ships were in danger, Jake had learned not to trust intelligence reports completely during his 20 years in the Earth Defense Force. Too many good soldiers had died because someone behind a desk had made assumptions about enemy capabilities. He kept his ships on high alert and his crews ready for immediate action, even though the council representatives assured him that the swarm never attacked without warning. The first sign of trouble came from an unexpected source. Chief Engineer Danny Brooks, working on repairs to the transport ship coordination systems, noticed something odd in the background radiation patterns. "Captain, I'm picking up energy signatures that don't match anything in our databases. They're faint, but they're definitely artificial." Jake moved to the engineering station, studying the readings on Brooks' screen. The patterns were subtle, almost lost in the normal cosmic background radiation, but they had a regularity that suggested intelligent design. "How long have you been tracking these signals?" "About 2 hours, sir. They started as random spikes, but they're getting stronger and more organized. It's like something is scanning the system, learning about our positions and capabilities." Before Jake could respond, the ship's proximity alarms began screaming. The main view screen flickered and changed to show the tactical display, where dozens of new contacts were appearing throughout the system. The Void Swarm had arrived, but not in the massive fleet formation that Council intelligence had predicted. Instead, they had somehow materialized in small groups scattered throughout the system. "Red alert!" Jake shouted over the alarm klaxons. "All hands to battle stations. Communications, get me the Council fleet commander immediately." The Council fleet, led by Cathara over my Nexus aboard the bioorganic dreadnought Harmony, responded within minutes. The massive alien vessel, over 2 kilometers long and covered in living tissue that pulsed with internal light, moved to engage the nearest group of swarm ships. Its weapon systems activated with a display that would have been beautiful under different circumstances. Jake watched in fascination as the Harmony unleashed its full arsenal against the swarm scouts. Plasma beams that could vaporize asteroids lanced out from the ship's organic weapon pods. Energy fields that could bend space itself wrapped around the enemy vessels. Bioelectric discharges that could shut down any known technology arced between. The alien ships. The swarm vessels absorbed every attack without apparent damage. They were unlike anything Jake had seen in the Council's tactical databases. Each ship appeared to be a living creature with dark organic hull plating that seemed to shift and flow like liquid metal. Tentacle-like appendages extended from their sides, reaching toward the Council ships with obvious hostile intent. "Captain," Lieutenant Parker called out, "the Council ships are requesting immediate evacuation of all civilian transports. The swarm is adapting to their weapons faster than predicted." Jake could see the truth of that statement on his tactical display. The swarm ships were not just surviving the Council's advanced weapons, they were learning from them. Each successive attack seemed to have less effect than the one before. Some of the creatures were even beginning to emit similar energy patterns to the Council weapons, as if they were copying the technology in real time. "Sir," Communications Officer Lisa Martinez announced, "Commander Foster is reporting that 3 swarm ships are moving toward the civilian transports. The Harmony is engaged with the main group and cannot provide support." Jake made a decision that would have surprised the Council representatives if they had been listening. "All human ships, this is Morrison. We're going to engage the swarm. Scouts threatening the transports. Use standard Earth Defense Force tactics, pattern Delta formation." The USS Defiance led the small human fleet toward the approaching swarm ships. Jake's force consisted of his destroyer, 2 frigates, and 3 converted transport ships with basic armaments. Against an enemy that had just shrugged off the most advanced weapons in the galaxy, it seemed like a suicide mission. "Captain," Lieutenant Parker said quietly, "our weapons are centuries behind Council technology. If their plasma cannons can't hurt these things, what chance do we have?" Jake smiled grimly. "Maybe that's exactly why we have a chance. Load all missile tubes with standard kinetic warheads. Prepare the railgun batteries for continuous fire. And Parker, make sure we have some of those old armor-piercing rounds that the Council thinks are so primitive." The human ships opened fire at maximum range, launching a barrage of simple chemical rockets and depleted uranium rounds. The weapons were crude by galactic standards, using basic physics and chemical reactions instead of exotic energy manipulation or quantum field effects. They were exactly the kind of weapons that the Council had dismissed as obsolete. The swarm ships, which had been adapting to and absorbing energy-based attacks for hours, suddenly found themselves facing something completely different. The kinetic rounds slammed into their organic hulls with devastating effect. The creature's ability to adapt to energy-based weapons was useless. Against simple mass traveling at high velocity. Jake watched in amazement as the first swarm ship erupted in a spray of dark fluid, its hull torn open by a direct hit from the Defiance's main railgun. The creature's healing abilities, which had been repairing damage from plasma weapons in seconds, seemed unable to cope with the massive physical trauma of a tungsten rod traveling at a significant fraction of light speed. "Target the second ship," Jake ordered. "All vessels, concentrate fire on the damaged section. Don't let it adapt to our weapons." The second swarm ship lasted less than 30 seconds under the concentrated fire of the human fleet. Its organic hull, which had been impervious to energy weapons, was shredded by the simple expedient of hitting it with very heavy objects moving very fast. The third ship attempted to flee, but the human vessels were faster and more maneuverable than their alien counterparts had expected. As the last swarm scout died in a burst of railgun fire, Jake became aware that the entire system had gone quiet. The massive Council fleet, with all its advanced technology and sophisticated weapons, had stopped firing. Every alien ship in the system was now focused on the small, human fleet that had just accomplished what their superior weapons could not. "Captain," Communications Officer Martinez said in a stunned voice, "we're receiving messages from every ship in the system. The Council Fleet Commander is requesting an immediate tactical briefing." Jake looked at his tactical display where the Council ships were still struggling against the main swarm force. The alien vessels were pouring incredible amounts of energy into their attacks, but the swarm creatures continued to adapt and grow stronger. Meanwhile, his small fleet had eliminated 3 of the same type of enemy using weapons that the Council considered primitive. "Tell the Council fleet that we're standing by to assist," Jake said. "And Martinez, make sure they understand that we're not using any secret technology. These are standard Earth Defense Force weapons, the same ones they've been laughing at for the past 5 years." The USS Defiance and her small fleet moved to support the Council vessels, their simple kinetic weapons proving devastatingly effective against an enemy that had learned to counter every advanced technology in the galaxy, as they closed with the main swarm force. Jake realized that the galaxy was about to learn its first lesson about what humans truly knew of battle. The news of the human victory at Kepler 442 spread through the galactic communication networks within hours, but the reaction from the Council leadership was exactly what Jake Morrison had expected. Fleet Admiral Velthari Prism, the highest-ranking military officer in the crystalline species, dismissed the event as a statistical anomaly during an emergency session of the War Council. The Swarm Scouts were clearly weakened by their encounter with our primary fleet, Admiral Prism announced, his crystalline form reflecting the chamber's lights in sharp, aggressive patterns. The human weapons succeeded only because we had already damaged the enemy vessels with our superior technology. Zephyrian Warmind Torrent, whose energy form flickered with barely contained irritation, agreed with the assessment. Furthermore, the swarm will adapt to these primitive kinetic weapons just as they have adapted to our energy-based systems. The next encounter will prove that chemical propulsion and metal projectiles are useless against a truly adaptive enemy. Jake stood at the human delegation table, watching the alien leaders dismiss his fleet's success with the same arrogance they had shown during the original Council meeting. Ambassador Lisa Carter tried to interject with tactical reports and combat recordings, but the Council representatives seemed determined to maintain their belief in technological superiority over tactical innovation, the assignment they gave to Jake's fleet reflected their continued dismissal of human capabilities. New Titan was a mining colony on the edge of Council space, with a population of barely 50,000 and no strategic value beyond its industrial output. The planet's 3 moons contained rare Earth elements that were useful for manufacturing, but the colony was considered expendable in the larger scope of the war. Captain Morrison, Commander Velthari Kristen explained during the mission briefing, your fleet will provide planetary defense for New Titan while our primary forces engage the swarm's main battle groups. Intelligence reports suggest that the enemy will bypass this system entirely, but we cannot leave civilian populations completely unprotected. Jake accepted the assignment without comment, but privately he suspected that the Council was using New Titan as a test case. If the humans could successfully defend a worthless colony, they might be given more important assignments. If they failed, the Council could point to the defeat as proof that the Kepler 442 victory had been nothing more than luck. The USS Defiance arrived at New Titan 2 weeks later, accompanied by 4 other human vessels and a hastily assembled defense fleet of converted civilian ships. The planet itself was a harsh world of rocky continents and shallow seas, with most of the population living in underground cities built around the mining operations. Colony Administrator Ruth Nelson met Jake at the orbital station, her weathered face showing the strain of trying to maintain morale among colonists who knew they were considered expendable. Captain Morrison, I'll be honest with you. Most of my people want to evacuate, but the Council has designated New Titan as a strategic resource that must be defended. They're counting on you to keep us safe. Jake spent the first week studying the planet's defenses and industrial capabilities. The mining operations used massive equipment that could move mountains of ore in a single day. The colony's geothermal power plants tapped into the planet's volcanic activity to provide unlimited energy. The manufacturing facilities could produce anything from basic tools to complex electronics using the raw materials extracted from the planet's crust. Chief Engineer Danny Brooks, working with the colony's technical staff, began to see possibilities that went far beyond conventional planetary defense. Captain, this place is like a giant weapons factory that nobody realizes exists. We've got mass drivers for launching or containers, industrial lasers for cutting through rock, and enough raw materials to build an entire fleet. The swarm arrived on the 23rd day, just as Jake was beginning to believe that the Council's intelligence reports might be accurate for once. The enemy force was 3 times larger than the scout group they had encountered at Kepler 442, and the creatures had clearly adapted to kinetic weapons. Their organic hulls were now covered with thick armor plating that could deflect railgun rounds, and their energy shields were designed to absorb the impact of high-velocity projectiles. Jake watched from the Defiance's bridge as the swarm ships began their approach to New Titan. The enemy vessels moved with the same fluid grace he had seen before, but their defensive adaptations were obvious even at long range. Simple kinetic weapons would not be enough to stop this force. "All ships, this is Morrison," Jake announced over the fleet communication system. "The enemy has adapted to our previous tactics. We're going to try something different." The first wave of swarm ships expected to face the same kinetic bombardment that had destroyed their scouts at Kepler 442. Instead, they found themselves flying into a carefully planned trap that used the planet's own industrial infrastructure as a weapon. The colony's mass drivers, normally used to launch or containers into orbit, had been modified to fire tungsten rods at incredible velocities. Marine Colonel Beth Rodriguez, commanding the planet's ground defenses, had spent 2 weeks training the colonists in guerrilla warfare techniques. When the swarm ships moved close to the planet's surface, they found themselves under attack from concealed positions throughout the mining complexes. The colonists used industrial equipment as weapons, turning or processors into makeshift artillery, and mining drones into guided missiles. The swarm creatures, accustomed to facing conventional fleets in open space, had no experience with the kind of integrated defense that the humans had created. Every time they adapted to one type of attack, the defenders switched to a completely different approach. When the enemy ships strengthened their armor against kinetic weapons, the humans used the colony's industrial lasers to cut through their hulls. When they adapted to energy-based attacks, explosive charges placed by mining crews detonated inside their ships. Jake coordinated the defense from orbit, but the real innovation came from the colonists themselves. Ruth Nelson organized civilian volunteers to operate the makeshift weapon systems. Danny Brooks led teams of engineers in creating new devices from mining equipment. Beth Rodriguez trained shop workers and office clerks to fight like soldiers. The battle lasted for 18 hours, with the human defenders constantly changing their tactics to stay ahead of the swarm's adaptation. They used the planet's geology against the invaders, triggering avalanches and volcanic eruptions in carefully planned sequences. They employed psychological warfare, using the colony's communication systems to broadcast confusing signals that disrupted the swarm's coordination. When the swarm ships tried to land ground forces, they found themselves fighting an enemy that refused to engage in conventional combat. The colonists used hit-and-run tactics, disappearing into the mining tunnels after each attack. They sabotaged swarm equipment using improvised explosives made from mining charges. They turned the planet's own environment into a weapon, using knowledge of local conditions that the alien invaders could not possibly possess. The turning point came when Danny Brooks successfully weaponized the colony's main geothermal plant. The massive energy output, normally used to power the mining operations, was redirected into a single focused beam that could punch through the heaviest swarm armor. The weapon could only be used once before it would destroy the power plant, but that single shot eliminated the swarm's command vessel and threw their entire force into chaos. As the surviving swarm ships fled the system, Jake realized that the Battle of New Titan had demonstrated something far more important than the effectiveness of improvised weapons. The colonists had shown that humans could adapt to any situation, using whatever resources were available to achieve victory. They had proven that the most important weapon in any conflict was not technology, but the ability to think creatively under pressure. The Council's response to the victory was predictable. Fleet Admiral Prism insisted that the swarm force had been weakened by previous engagements. Warmind Torrent argued that the enemy had been caught off guard and would not fall for the same tricks again. But Jake noticed something different in their voices, a note of uncertainty that had not been there before. The galaxy was beginning to learn that humans knew more about battle than anyone had suspected. The second successful defense by human forces at New Titan created something that the Galactic Council had not experienced in over 2 years of warfare against the Void Swarm, doubt about their own methods. Commander Velthari Kristen arrived at the colony 3 days after the battle, accompanied by a team of military analysts from 6 different species, who had been ordered to investigate what they still refused to call superior tactics. Jake Morrison watched the alien delegations. Shuttles land at New Titan's main spaceport, noting how the crystalline vessels seemed to move with less confidence than usual. The Council representatives had expected to find evidence of hidden technology or secret weapons that would explain human success. Instead, they were about to discover something far more disturbing to their worldview. "Captain Morrison, Commander," Kristen said as he stepped off his shuttle, his crystalline form reflecting the colony's industrial lights in sharp patterns. "The Council requires a complete tactical briefing on your defensive methods. Our analysts need to understand how a species with primitive technology continues to achieve victories against an enemy that has defeated our most advanced forces." Jake led the delegation through the colony's mining complexes, showing them the improvised weapons that had been used during the battle. The aliens examined the modified mass drivers, the weaponized industrial lasers, and the explosive charges made from mining equipment. Their instruments scanned every device, searching for advanced technology that simply was not there. "These are standard mining tools," announced Zephyrian analyst Flowmind Praxis, his energy form flickering with confusion. "There are no exotic materials, no quantum field manipulators, no dimensional phase technology. How did you achieve a 93% kill ratio against an adapted enemy force using such basic equipment?" Jake smiled at the question. "We didn't win because of our equipment. We won because of how we used it. Your species focus on building better weapons, but humans focus on using weapons better." The statement seemed to confuse the alien analysts. Even more, Kithara Drone Observer Unit 7 buzzed in harmonized tones that the translation device rendered as frustrated inquiry. Clarification requested. How does inferior technology become superior through usage methodology? Chief Engineer Danny Brooks joined the group, carrying a tablet filled with tactical diagrams and combat recordings. "Maybe it would help if we showed you some human military history." "Captain Morrison, should we start with Sun Tzu or jump straight to modern warfare?" Jake decided to begin with basics. He took the delegation to the colony's conference room, where he had prepared a presentation that would have been routine for any human military academy but was revolutionary for species that had achieved peace through technological advancement rather than military victory. "Every human who enters military service studies thousands of years of warfare," Jake explained, activating a holographic display that showed ancient battle formations. "We learn about battles fought with bronze weapons, iron swords, gunpowder, and nuclear devices. The weapons change, but the principles of warfare remain the same." The alien analysts watched in fascination as Jake displayed the Battle of Thermopylae, where 300 Spartan warriors held off a vastly superior Persian force using terrain advantages and superior tactics. He showed them the Battle of Cannae, where Hannibal encircled a larger Roman army through careful positioning and timing. He demonstrated how Confederate General Robert Lee won battles against better-equipped Union forces through innovative tactics and rapid movement. Commander Kristen's crystalline form pulsed with what Jake had learned to recognize as intellectual struggle. These examples show inferior forces defeating superior ones, but they involve conflicts between similar species with comparable technology. The Void Swarm represents a completely different type of enemy. Major Karen Lewis, who had arrived with the human fleet's marine contingent, stepped forward to address that concern. "Commander, the principles are the same regardless of the enemy. Let me show you something we call small unit tactics." What followed was a demonstration that would fundamentally change how the galaxy approached warfare. Karen took a squad of human marines and a group of Kithara warriors to the colony's training facility, where she proceeded to show the aliens how individual soldiers could function effectively without constant communication and central control. The Kithara warriors, accustomed to operating as part of a hive mind with instant information sharing, struggled to understand how humans could coordinate complex maneuvers using nothing more than hand signals and pre-planned responses to changing situations. When Karen's Marines adapted their formation 3 times during a single exercise, responding to simulated enemy actions without receiving new orders, the alien observers were visibly disturbed. How do they know what to do without receiving instructions? From a central command authority? Observer Unit 7 buzzed in confused harmonics. Individual decision-making during combat should result in chaos and conflicting actions. Karen smiled at the question. Every Marine is trained to understand the overall mission and to make decisions that support that mission. We don't need constant orders because we all understand what we're trying to achieve. When the situation changes, each person adapts in ways that help the team succeed. The concept of individual initiative within a coordinated framework was alien to species that had evolved beyond internal conflict. The Velthari made decisions through crystalline resonance that required consensus. The Zephyrians operated through energy sharing that created unified thought patterns. The Kuthara were literally a hive mind that could not function without constant connection between individuals. Jake realized that he was watching the aliens confront a fundamental truth about human military effectiveness. You've all achieved peace by eliminating the causes of conflict within your species. Humans achieved peace by becoming so good at conflict that we made it too expensive to pursue. Every human learns to fight because we've never stopped needing to know how. The demonstration continued with more advanced concepts that challenged everything the aliens thought they knew about warfare. Jake showed them how human forces could operate without communication by using what military theorists called mission-type orders, where subordinate commanders were given objectives and allowed to determine their own methods of achieving them. Danny Brooks explained the concept of combined arms warfare, where different types of weapons and units were integrated to create capabilities that exceeded the sum of their parts. The aliens watched recordings of human forces seamlessly transitioning between different tactics during the same battle, adapting to enemy responses faster than their opponents could. Counter-adapt. The breakthrough moment came when Commander Kristen asked about human psychological warfare techniques. Jake showed him recordings from the new Titan battle, where the colonists had used the colony's communication systems to broadcast confusing signals at the swarm forces. The swarm creatures share information instantly across their fleet, Jake explained. We realized that we could use that against them by feeding false information into their communication network. While they were trying to process contradictory data, our forces attacked from directions they weren't expecting. The concept of using an enemy's strength against them was so foreign to the alien military analysts that several of them had to have their translation devices recalibrated. Species that had always relied on superior technology to win conflicts had never developed the art of turning enemy advantages into vulnerabilities. Flow mind. Praxis flickered through several energy configurations before asking, how do you develop strategies for using enemy capabilities against them? This requires understanding opponents better than they understand themselves. Major Lewis answered that question with a single word that would echo through galactic military academies for centuries to come: experience. Every human military officer studies not just our own victories, but our defeats. We learn from every battle ever fought, including the ones we lost. We understand how thinking opponents will react because we've been fighting thinking opponents for our entire history. The final demonstration took place in space, where Jake's fleet engaged in a mock battle against a council task force. The alien ships had superior weapons, better shields, and more advanced technology in every measurable category. But as the exercise progressed, the human vessels consistently outmaneuvered their opponents using tactics that the aliens found impossible to predict or counter. The humans would feint toward one target, then attack another. They would appear to retreat, drawing the alien ships into carefully prepared traps. They would coordinate attacks from multiple directions, forcing their opponents to choose between defending against different threats simultaneously. When the exercise ended with a decisive human victory despite their technological disadvantage, Commander Kristen requested a private meeting with Jake. The crystalline commander's form had lost its earlier aggressive brightness, replaced by the subdued glow that Jake had learned indicated deep contemplation. The joint task force that assembled at the Arcturus Naval Station 3 weeks later was unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of his new flagship, the USS Endeavour, watching as ships from 12 different species formed up around the human vessel in formations that would have been impossible before the Council's change of heart about human military capabilities. The Velthari had contributed their massive, crystalline dreadnought Eternal Harmony, a ship that could crack planets with its resonance weapons. The Zephyrians provided 3 of their phase-shift cruisers that could exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously. The Kithara sent their bioorganic carrier Collective Will, housing thousands of drone fighters controlled by a single hive mind. But the real revolution was not in the ships themselves, but in how they were being used. For the first time in galactic history, advanced alien technology was being deployed according to human tactical doctrine. Captain Rob Martinez, commanding the human destroyer USS Phoenix, was coordinating with Velthari Captain Kristen Prime to develop new ways of using crystalline resonance technology for surprise attacks rather than direct bombardment. Commander Susan Blake, aboard the frigate USS Falcon, had been working with Zephyrian Flow Commander Nexus to turn their phase-shifting abilities into a tool for infiltration and sabotage rather than just defensive maneuvering. The concept of using advanced technology for stealth and deception instead of overwhelming force was revolutionary for species that had always believed that superior firepower was the key to victory. The first test of the new combined tactics came at the Rigel system, where a swarm battle group had established a forward base on the system's outer planets. Intelligence reports indicated that the enemy force consisted of over 200 vessels, including several of the massive hive ships that served as mobile command centers for swarm operations. Jake studied the tactical display on his flagship's bridge, noting how the swarm had positioned their forces in a defensive formation that would have been nearly impregnable against conventional council attacks. The enemy ships were arranged in overlapping layers, with the smaller scouts providing early warning while the larger vessels prepared to concentrate their fire on any approaching threat. "All task force commanders, this is Admiral Morrison," Jake announced over the fleet communication system, still adjusting to his new rank and the authority that came with it. "We're going to hit them with everything we've learned about fighting these creatures. Remember, the goal is not to out-technology them, but to outthink them." The attack began with a deception that would have been impossible without the cooperation between human tactical thinking and alien technology. The Zephyrian phase-shift cruisers used their dimensional abilities not to attack, but to create false sensor readings throughout the system. To the swarm's detection systems, it appeared that massive fleets were approaching from 6 different directions simultaneously, while the enemy forces repositioned to meet these phantom threats. Captain Martinez led a strike force of human and Velthari ships in a completely different approach. The crystalline vessels used their resonance technology to mask the signatures of the human ships, allowing the combined force to approach the swarm base without being detected. The real innovation came from Commander Blake's infiltration team. Using Zephyrian phase shift technology, small groups of human marines were transported directly inside the swarm hive ships. The aliens had always used their phase abilities for large-scale tactical movement, but humans had realized that the same technology could be used to place small forces exactly where they could do the most damage. Chief Engineer Danny Brooks, now serving as the task force's technical advisor, had spent weeks working with alien scientists to develop new applications for their existing technology. The Kithara bioorganic systems, originally designed for coordination and communication, were modified to carry computer viruses developed by human programmers. The swarm's own biological networks became the delivery system for attacks that disrupted their coordination and command structure. The battle that followed demonstrated every principle of warfare that humans had tried to teach their alien allies. Instead of meeting the swarm in direct confrontation where the enemy's adaptive abilities could be used effectively, The Joint Task Force struck from multiple directions using tactics that changed faster than the creatures could respond. When the swarm adapted their defenses to kinetic weapons, the task force switched to energy-based attacks delivered through Velthari resonance technology. When the enemies strengthened their hulls against energy weapons, human boarding parties used conventional explosives placed in critical locations by Marines who had been phase-shifted inside their ships. The key moment came when the largest swarm hive ship attempted to coordinate a counterattack against the human flagship. The creature's biological command systems, enhanced by centuries of adaptation and evolution, should have been able to process information and issue orders faster than any mechanical system. But the human computer viruses, delivered through Kithara bio-networks, had infected the ship's decision-making processes with false data and contradictory commands. Jake watched from his bridge as the massive enemy vessel began firing on its own escort ships, its corrupted command systems identifying friendly forces as hostile targets. The psychological warfare techniques that humans had developed for fighting other thinking beings proved devastatingly effective against creatures that had never encountered deliberate deception and misdirection. The swarm forces, accustomed to adapting to technological threats, found themselves unable to cope with an enemy that constantly changed its approach based on their responses. Every time the creatures developed a counter to one type of attack, the Joint Task Force immediately switched to a completely different method that exploited new vulnerabilities. Major Karen Lewis, leading the Marine assault teams, reported from inside one of the swarm command ships, "Admiral, these creatures are incredibly advanced, but they think like a computer program. They analyze threats and develop responses, but they don't understand the concept of bluffing or misdirection. When we show them a fake weakness, they always take the bait." The battle lasted for 6 hours, with the Joint Task Force systematically dismantling the swarm battle group using a combination of superior technology and superior tactics. But the real victory was not in the destruction of enemy ships, but in the demonstration that alien technology could be made exponentially more effective when combined with human military thinking. Captain Rob Martinez, coordinating with his Velthari counterpart, successfully used crystalline resonance weapons to create a series of false targets that drew swarm forces into a carefully prepared trap. Commander Susan Blake's infiltration teams, working with Zephyrion phase shift specialists, disabled 3 enemy command ships from the inside without firing a shot. The Kithara, learning to use their hive mind capabilities for deception rather than just coordination, successfully convinced an entire swarm squadron that their own command ship had been captured by enemy forces. The resulting confusion allowed human vessels to destroy the confused enemies before they could reorganize their defenses. When the last swarm ship was destroyed, Jake realized that the Battle of Rigel had proven something far more important than the effectiveness of combined human-alien tactics. The various species of the galaxy, working together under human military leadership, had achieved a level of coordination and effectiveness that none of them could have reached independently. "All commanders, this is Admiral Morrison," Jake announced to the combined fleet. "Outstanding work, everyone. But remember, this was just the first test. The swarm will adapt to what we've shown them today, which means we need to be ready with completely new tactics for the next engagement." The response from the alien commanders would have been unthinkable just months earlier. Instead of dismissing human warnings about enemy adaptation, they immediately began requesting tactical briefings on alternative approaches. The crystalline, energy-based, and bioorganic species that had once considered humans primitive were now eager students of human military doctrine. Flow Commander Nexus, whose energy form flickered with what Jake had learned to recognize as excitement, transmitted his thoughts to the fleet. "Admiral Morrison, the Zephyrian High Command requests permission to study human deception techniques in greater detail. We believe our phase shift technology has applications that we never considered." Kithara Overmind Nexus, speaking through its drone representative, buzzed in harmonized tones. "The collective acknowledges superior human tactical methodology. Request integration of individualistic decision-making protocols into hive mind coordination. Systems. Jake looked out at the combined fleet, watching as ships from 12 different species maintained formation around his human flagship. The galaxy was finally learning to fight like humans, combining advanced technology with the tactical innovation that came from thousands of years of warfare experience. The swarm's primary hive world hung in space like a massive organic tumor, its surface covered with structures that pulsed with dark energy and extended tendrils that reached into dimensions beyond normal space. Intelligence reports indicated that the world-sized creature served as the central nervous system for the entire swarm, coordinating attacks across dozens of star systems and processing information from millions of individual creatures. Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the USS Endeavour, studying the tactical displays that showed the approach of the largest fleet in galactic history. Over 3,000 ships from 12 different species had assembled for this final assault, but Jake knew that numbers alone would not be enough to defeat an enemy that had grown stronger with every battle. The swarm had learned from their defeats at human hands. Their ships now carried armor designed to deflect kinetic weapons, energy shields that could absorb multiple types of attacks, and communication systems that were supposedly immune to the computer viruses that had been so effective in previous engagements. The creatures had adapted to every tactic that the Joint Task Force had used against them. "Admiral," reported Captain Rob Martinez from his position aboard the destroyer USS Phoenix, "long-range sensors are detecting massive energy buildups throughout the hive world. The enemy is preparing for our arrival." Jake nodded, unsurprised by the intelligence. The swarm had proven to be learning opponents, and they would not make the same mistakes that had cost them so many battles. This final confrontation would require something that no previous engagement had demanded: the complete integration of human tactical thinking with alien technological capabilities. "All fleet commanders, this is Admiral Morrison," Jake announced over the communication system that now linked ships from across the galaxy. "Today we're going to show the swarm what happens when 12 different civilizations learn to fight like humans. Remember, our goal is not to out-adapt them, but to overwhelm their ability to adapt." The concept that Jake was about to implement had never been attempted in galactic warfare. Instead of using one type of attack that the enemy could eventually counter, the combined fleet would attack simultaneously using every different weapon system, tactical approach, and strategic method that the various species had developed over their centuries of evolution. Commander Susan Blake, leading the Zephyrian phase shift squadrons, began the assault by creating dimensional distortions throughout the system. But instead of using the technology for concealment or surprise attacks, the energy-based ships created thousands of false targets that appeared to be massive fleets approaching from every direction simultaneously. The Velthari, crystalline dreadnoughts, working in coordination with human tactical advisors, used their resonance weapons not for direct attack, but to create harmonic frequencies that disrupted the swarm's communication networks. Captain Kristen Prime had learned to think like a human warrior, using his species' most powerful weapons for indirect effects, rather than overwhelming force. The Kithara bio-organic carriers, guided by human understanding of psychological warfare, began broadcasting false information through every communication channel that the swarm used for coordination. The hive mind species had learned to use their collective consciousness for deception, feeding contradictory orders and false intelligence to enemy forces across the entire system, but the real innovation came from the human ships themselves. Chief Engineer Danny Brooks had spent months working with alien scientists to develop new applications for Earth's supposedly primitive technology. The human vessels now carried weapons that combined kinetic projectiles with Velthari resonance technology, creating rounds that could phase through shields and armor before exploding inside enemy ships. The swarm's response was immediate and massive. The hive world erupted with defensive fire that included every type of weapon that the creatures had learned to use during 2 years of warfare. Energy beams that could vaporize asteroids, bio-organic missiles that could track targets across star systems, and dimensional distortions that could tear holes in space itself. Jake watched from his flagship as the enemy defensive systems engaged targets throughout the system, but the swarm's greatest strength had become their greatest weakness. Their ability to adapt to threats required them to analyze and understand each type of attack before developing counters. When faced with thousands of different attacks happening simultaneously, their adaptation systems became overloaded. Major Karen Lewis, leading Marine assault teams aboard Zephyrian phase-shift vessels, reported from inside the Hive world's outer defenses, "Admiral, the enemy is trying to adapt to everything at once. Their command systems are processing so much data that they're starting to contradict themselves." The battle became a demonstration of the human military concept known as combined arms warfare, but on a scale that had never been attempted before. Every species in the fleet contributed their unique capabilities to a coordinated assault that prevented the swarm from focusing on any single threat long enough to develop effective countermeasures. When the swarm strengthened their shields against energy weapons, kinetic projectiles tore through their hulls. When they armored against kinetic attacks, bioorganic viruses infected their systems from the inside. When they developed immunity to computer viruses, psychological warfare confused their decision-making processes. The key breakthrough came when Commander Blake's infiltration teams, working with Kithara bioengineers, successfully planted human-designed logic bombs in the Hive world's central nervous system. The creatures had adapted their communication networks to resist external computer viruses, but they had no defense against logical contradictions that attacked the fundamental assumptions of their collective consciousness. "All ships, this is Admiral Morrison," Jake announced as the enemy defenses began to falter. "The swarm is starting to break down. Continue pressure on all fronts, but be ready to adapt if they find a way to counter our attacks." But the swarm never got the chance to adapt. The logical paradoxes that human programmers had embedded in their central command systems created cascading failures throughout their entire network. Ships that had been coordinating perfectly began firing on each other. Defense systems turned against the structures they were supposed to protect. The Hive world itself began to convulse as its own biological processes became confused and contradictory. Captain Martinez, coordinating the final assault with his mixed human-alien task force, reported the breakthrough that ended the war. "Admiral, the enemy command structure is completely broken. They're not just failing to adapt to our attacks, they're forgetting how to function as a unified force." The destruction of the Swarm Hive world took less than an hour once their coordination failed, but the real victory had been achieved through months of teaching alien species to think like human warriors. The crystalline, energy-based, and bioorganic civilizations had learned that technology was only as effective as the tactical thinking that guided its use. Commander Velthari Kristen, his crystalline form now pulsing with patterns that Jake had learned to recognize as deep respect, transmitted his final battle report. "Admiral Morrison, the Velthari High Command acknowledges that human military doctrine has transformed our understanding of warfare. We entered this conflict believing that superior technology guaranteed victory, but we have learned that superior thinking defeats superior technology." The Zephyrian Flow Commander Nexus, whose energy form flickered with what the translation systems rendered as profound gratitude, added his own assessment. "The Zephyrian Collective has discovered that our phase shift capabilities become exponentially more effective when combined with human concepts of deception and misdirection. We had the tools for victory, but humans taught us how to use them." Kithara Overmind Nexus, speaking through its drone representative, buzzed in harmonized acknowledgement. "The collective consciousness has been enhanced by integration of human individualistic tactical thinking. We now understand that unity of purpose does not require uniformity of method." As the last swarm vessels fled into deep space, Jake stood on his bridge looking out at the combined fleet that had achieved victory through cooperation rather than conquest. The 12 species of the Galactic Council had learned to fight together, combining their unique capabilities under human tactical leadership to defeat an enemy that had seemed invincible. "All commanders, this is Admiral Morrison. Jake announced, to the fleet that now looked to human leadership for military guidance. Outstanding work, everyone. We've proven that the galaxy's greatest strength is not any single technology or weapon, but our ability to work together and learn from each other. The response from across the fleet demonstrated how completely the galaxy's understanding of warfare had changed. Instead of celebrating technological superiority, the alien commanders praised tactical innovation. Instead of competing for individual glory, they shared credit with their human advisors and alien allies.